Let me tell you about a man named Edsel Wadlow. In the spring of 1987, Edsel was 71 years old. He lived alone in a wood frame farmhouse, 3.5 miles south of Duncan, Oklahoma, on 160 acres of dry wheat ground his daddy had bought back in 1932 with money saved from working the oil field crews. His wife Marjorie had died of a quiet heart in March of 1979, 8 years to the month before this story starts, and Edsel had kept her gingham curtains on the kitchen windows because he could not yet think of taking them down. He drank his coffee black. He read his Bible most mornings, and on Saturday, March 14th, 1987, he put on the same brown corduroy jacket he had worn to his daddy's funeral, walked out to the gravel turnaround, and started his old red pickup truck for the slowest drive of his life. What Edsel was driving toward, that cold, cloudy March morning, was the Stevens County tax sale at the county courthouse in Duncan. And what he was carrying, folded carefully in the inside breast pocket of that brown corduroy jacket, was a piece of paper his daddy Wilbur Wadlow had pressed into his hand 39 years ago in the summer of 1948 on a porch in this same farmhouse with a kerosene lamp burning between them. Wilbur Wadlow had worked as a chainman on the oil field survey crew that summer of 1948. The crew was laying out the access roads and pipeline easements for what was about to become the Comanche Field, the largest single oil-producing district in southwestern Oklahoma at that time. The lease was being assembled by a Tulsa-based company called Stratton-Reese Petroleum, and Stratton-Reese had been buying up surface rights and mineral rights from the descendants of the original 1907 Choctaw allotments for the better part of 2 years. The survey that summer was the final step before drilling. Wilbur was 43 years old. He was paid $2.40 an hour to walk the section lines, hold the chain, and pound the stake markers into the red dirt. He could read a section map better than the senior surveyor. He could spot a missed monument from 60 feet. And on the second morning of that survey, walking the gravel section line that would become the only access road from the state highway down to where the first 40 wells were being staked, Wilbur saw something the rest of the crew missed. He had stopped beside a 38-year-old Osage orange post on the north side of the section line, a post that none of the official 1948 plat sheets had marked. The post was wired with 3 rusted nails into the pattern of a property monument. Wilbur had walked 33 paces south and found its twin, 66 feet apart, a surveyor's parallel. Somebody, 25 years before, had set those 2 posts and run a property line. Wilbur knelt in the road dust, took out his pocket notebook, and made one careful penciled entry. Then he stood up, brushed the red dirt from his knees, and said nothing to the rest of the crew for the next 4 months. There was a 1-acre rectangular strip of ground running due east-west across that future road that did not belong to the people Stratton-Reese had bought from. It belonged to nobody on Stratton-Reese's title chain at all. It had been created in 1923 by a partition deed between 2 Choctaw sisters, Rachel and Hattie Bonham, who had been heir to a single 160-acre allotment from their father. Rachel got the north 80, Hattie got the south 80. And the 1-acre rectangular strip between them, 66 feet wide and a 1/4 mile long, had been deeded jointly to a third party, a hartshorn cousin, in payment of a debt. That cousin had died childless in 1931. The strip had reverted to the county for unpaid taxes, then sat in a forgotten line on the tax rolls for the better part of 60 years, because nobody had ever bothered to claim it. It was filed in Recording Book 12 under partition deeds, while every other instrument in the chain of title to the Comanche Field had been filed in Recording Book 27 under mineral and surface conveyances. Stratton-Reese's title attorney, in the summer of 1948, had searched Book 27. He had not searched Book 12, and so the strip parcel, 66 feet wide and a quarter-mile long, sat unowned by anyone in the room when the Comanche Field oil lease was signed on July 6, 1948. Wilbur Wadlow knew it. He told nobody. He kept his survey notes, the original yellow-penciled chainman's notes, in a battered red-rimmed coffee can on the top shelf of the tack room in his barn. And on a summer porch in 1948, he handed his only son, Edsel, then 32 years old, a copy of the 1923 partition deed and said, "Son, one day, when nobody else is watching, this little piece of ground is going to come up for tax sale, and when it does, you go and you buy it. Quietly, you don't tell a soul what you know. You wait, however long it takes." Wilbur Wadlow died of a stroke in November of 1971. He was 66. Edsel kept the coffee can on the same shelf. He paid his daddy's quiet attention to the Stevens County tax rolls for the next 16 years, never missing the spring delinquency notices the county printed in the back pages of the Duncan banner. The strip parcel never came up. Heirs of the long-dead Hartshorn cousin would surface every few years, pay the back taxes, and disappear again. Edsel waited, and then, in the September issue of the 1986 delinquency notices, listed in a small column on page 11 under Stevens County, Section 8 parcels available. March 1987, he saw it. Parcel number 47, 1 acre, more or less. Last assessed valuation $75. Years, delinquent 6. The Hartshorn heirs had finally let it go. Edsel cut the column out of the newspaper with his wife's sewing scissors and laid it flat on the kitchen table beside the coffee can. He sat looking at both for a long time. Then he poured himself another cup of coffee and waited for March. And so on the morning of March 14th, 1987, with the folded copy of his daddy's 1923 partition deed in his breast pocket and the coffee can sitting on the seat beside him, Edsel Wadlow drove his old red pickup the 3.5 miles into Duncan, parked on the south side of Main Street, climbed the limestone steps of the Stevens County Courthouse, and walked into the second-floor district courtroom where the tax sale was about to begin. The courtroom had been emptied of its usual benches. 46 folding chairs had been set out in 6 neat rows facing the auctioneer's wooden podium. The auctioneer was a barrel-chested old fellow named Buck Renfrow, 64 years old, who had been calling cattle sales and equipment sales and tax sales for the county for 31 years. To his right, at a small folding table, sat Mavis Coldwell, the Stevens County treasurer, 56 years old, in a navy blue dress with a white collar, holding a clipboard and a ledger book. The room was about half full. There were perhaps 24 bidders. Most of them Edsel recognized. A couple of cattle ranchers from out toward Marlow, an oil field welder who picked up little parcels every spring, the widow Holcomb who ran the feed store, a couple of young land speculators in nicer jackets, and in the front row, in two folding chairs, pulled slightly closer together than the rest, sat two men in suits. The taller of the two was Lawrence Tobias, 48 years old, Regional Vice President of Land Acquisition for Stratton-Reese Petroleum Corporation. He had flown down from Tulsa the night before. He wore a charcoal gray pinstripe suit, a starched white shirt, a deep red silk necktie, and polished black shoes. His black hair was combed straight back from a high forehead and held in place by a careful application of pomade. He was leaning back in his folding chair with his right arm draped over the empty chair beside him. To his left sat his junior landman, a younger fellow in a brown suit, holding a clipboard with the day's parcel list and a pencil with a fresh point. Buck Renfrow tapped his gavel 3 times on the wooden block. "All right, folks, Stevens County tax sale, March 14th, 1987. Cash or cashier's check. Settled by close of business today. Parcels go in numerical order. Mavis has your title work. No warranty of title. Sold as is. Any questions?" There were none. Buck looked at his clipboard. "Parcel 1, 6 1/4 acres, north of Comanche. Starting bid, $300. Lawrence Tobias's junior landman raised his pencil. $300, Buck said. "Anybody?" The cattle rancher from Marlow raised one finger. $500. $600, said the junior landman. $800, said the rancher. $1,200, said the junior landman. The cattle rancher shook his head. $1,200 once, $1,200 twice. Sold to Stratton-Reese Petroleum, parcel 1. The gavel cracked. The junior landman wrote a number on his clipboard. This was the pattern for the next 45 parcels. Stratton-Reese Petroleum bid on every single parcel that touched the boundaries of the Comanche Field. They were not picky. They were not careful. They were buying up the orphan parcels and the tax-delinquent strips, because the Comanche Field had been producing for 39 years, and the company's senior land attorney had decided that winter that it was time to clean up the perimeter. They bought parcels for $200. They bought parcels for $3,200. They bought parcels for $5,600. Lawrence Tobias never raised his voice. He simply nodded, and his junior landman bid. After 2 hours and 40 minutes, Buck Renfrow had worked his way down to parcel 46. Stratton-Reese had bought 19 of the first 46 parcels. The pile of folded cashier's checks in the junior landman's leather folio was, by Edsel's quiet estimate, somewhere north of $40,000. Then Buck cleared his throat and pulled the next page on his clipboard. Parcel 47, Strip Parcel, Section 8. Township 2 North, Range 7 West, 1 acre, more or less. 66 feet by quarter mile, east-west. Last assessed valuation, $75. Starting bid, $50. There was a small ripple of confused laughter from the back of the room. Strip parcels were a known oddity in Oklahoma title work, but a parcel this skinny and this small was unusual enough that nobody quite understood what it was for. Lawrence Tobias glanced at his junior landman. The junior landman squinted at his parcel list. The map on his clipboard had been printed from the Stevens County Plat Book, and on that map the strip was not visible. He shrugged at Lawrence. $50, the junior landman said, in a tone of mild indifference. Edsel Wadlow stood up from his folding chair in the 4th row. He did not raise his hand. He did not clear his throat. He simply stood, holding his brown corduroy jacket closed at the front with his left hand, and said, in his quiet farmer's voice, $200. The room turned to look at him. 24 heads all at once. Lawrence Tobias swiveled in his front row chair and looked back over his shoulder at the old man standing in row 4. 200 from the gentleman in the brown jacket, Buck said. Lawrence smiled. It was a thin, pomaded smile, a smile of a man who had eaten well at the Tulsa club the night before. 500, Lawrence said, without consulting his junior landman. There was a small laugh from the back of the room. $500 was an absurd price for a 1-acre strip nobody understood. But Stratton-Reese was, on principle, buying everything in this neighborhood that day, and the old farmer in row 4 had clearly stepped out of his league. Edsel did not blink. $1,200, he said. Lawrence Tobias's eyebrows lifted. He looked at his junior landman. The junior landman frowned at his map and shook his head very slightly. There was nothing on this strip, the head shake said. There was nothing here. 1,500, Lawrence said, but his voice had gone a half-tone harder. Edsel waited 2 full seconds. He felt his daddy's folded 1923 partition deed warm against his ribs, through the lining of the corduroy jacket. He felt the kitchen of his farmhouse 3.5 miles south, where his wife's gingham curtains hung still in the gray March light. He felt his daddy's hand on his shoulder on a porch in 1948. $3,200, Edsel said. A gasp went up from the third row. The widow Holcomb laughed out loud. The oil field welder from Marlow shook his head and muttered something to his neighbor about the old man having lost his mind. Lawrence Tobias's pomaded smile slipped sideways across his face, and the smile became, for 1 full second, a sneer. Then Lawrence laughed. It was a sharp, short bark of a laugh, the laugh of a man who had decided that an opponent was not worth the trouble. He turned all the way around in his folding chair to face Edsel directly, and the laugh broke open into a wider grin. $3,200, he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, for 1 acre of dust. He shook his head. Old-timer, you've got more money than sense. It's yours. The laughter rippled through the room. The widow Holcomb laughed. The young land speculators laughed. The cattle rancher from Marlow laughed and slapped his knee. Buck Renfrow, behind the podium, raised his gavel. $3,200 to the gentleman in the brown jacket. Going once, going twice, sold. The gavel cracked. Parcel 47, sold to... Buck squinted at the bidder's badge Edsel was wearing on his lapel. Edsel Wadlow. Edsel sat back down in his folding chair. He folded his hands in his lap. He did not look at Lawrence Tobias. He did not look at the widow Holcomb. He looked straight ahead at Buck Renfrow's podium, and he waited for the next parcel to be called. He paid Mavis Coldwell $3,200 in cashier's checks at the back table at 1:45 in the afternoon. She handed him the tax deed, signed and stamped. He folded it carefully into the inside pocket of his corduroy jacket, on top of his daddy's 1923 partition deed, walked down the limestone steps of the courthouse, and started his red pickup. He did not drive straight home. He drove the 6 blocks south to Greenwood Cemetery, parked under the bare branches of a sycamore tree at the cemetery's east gate, and walked the gravel path he had walked 403 times since March of 1979. He stopped in the third row at a polished granite headstone reading Marjorie Lee Wadlow, beloved wife, 1918 to 1979. The grass was just starting to come back green at the base of the stone. He took off his cap. He stood for a long time with his hand on the top of the stone, the cold, polished granite warming slowly under his palm. "Marge," he said quietly, "I bought it today, Daddy's strip, $3,200. They all laughed in the courtroom." He paused. "I'm going home to build the fence." He put his cap back on. He walked back to his pickup, and he drove the 3.5 miles south to his 160 acres. That afternoon, with the gray Oklahoma light coming low across his pasture, Edsel Wadlow drove out to the eastern edge of his 160 acres, parked his pickup on the section line, and unloaded 63 brand-new steel T-posts, 2 reels of 4-strand barbed wire, a steel post driver, and a hand-painted plywood sign that he had finished the previous evening in his barn. He worked until full dark. He drove 63 T-posts into the red Oklahoma earth, spaced 15 feet apart, in a straight line that ran for exactly a quarter mile, 66 feet north of the south line of Section 8, due east-west. He strung 4 strands of barbed wire, and at the precise center of that fence, where the gravel oil field service road from the state highway crossed the strip going south toward the heart of the Comanche Field, he posted his plywood sign. The sign read, "Private property, no trespassing, no vehicles. Edsel Wadlow, owner. Recorded March 14th, 1987. He drove home under a hard white moon. He ate a cold supper of cornbread and ham. He read the 2nd chapter of 1 Kings by the kitchen lamp. He set the coffee can on the kitchen table where his wife's gingham curtains hung still in the dark window. And he slept the deepest sleep he had slept since 1979. The Stratton-Reese Petroleum survey crew, 3 young men in hard hats and orange safety vests, drove out of Tulsa at 5 o'clock on the morning of Monday, March 16th. They had been ordered the previous Friday to lay out the proposed pipeline expansion route through the Comanche Field. The route ran due south along the gravel oil field service road from the state highway. At 7:42 in the morning, just as the sun came up across the dry tan pasture, the lead surveyor's white pickup truck rounded the gentle curve a half-mile north of the field, and the lead surveyor's foot came down hard on the brake pedal. A 4-strand barbed wire fence ran across the road. The 3 surveyors stood at the new fence for the better part of 10 minutes, walking up and down its length, reading and rereading the plywood sign in the center. Then the lead surveyor radioed the Tulsa office. The Tulsa office radioed Lawrence Tobias's secretary. The secretary called Lawrence Tobias at his hotel in Duncan, where he was preparing to fly home. Lawrence Tobias listened for 38 seconds, said one short word, and hung up the phone. By 9:15 that morning, Stratton-Reese Petroleum's senior land attorney, a careful old man named Vernon Pell, was sitting in his Tulsa office with the Stevens County Section 8 title work spread across his oak desk. He was 68 years old, 2 years from retirement, and he had been the senior land attorney at Stratton-Reese since 1962. He read the title work 3 times. He pulled the original 1948 oil lease from the corporate archive. He pulled the Comanche Field surface easement file. He pulled the master plat book for Township 2 North, Range 7 West. And at 11:32 on the morning of March 16th, 1987, Vernon Pell picked up the phone, called Lawrence Tobias at his hotel in Duncan, and said 3 sentences in a steady voice. "Lawrence, there is a 1-acre strip parcel running east-west through the center of the Comanche Field access road and the main gathering pipeline easement. It is not on our lease. It has never been on our lease. It was missed in 1948. Lawrence Tobias sat down on the edge of his hotel bed. "Vernon," he said carefully, "how is that possible?" "It was filed in Recording Book 12 in 1923 under partition deeds. Our title work in 1948 only searched Book 27. The strip was created by a partition between two Choctaw sisters, deeded jointly to a third-party Hartshorn cousin in payment of a debt. The cousin died in 1931. The strip reverted to the county and sat on the tax rolls. It was sold at the Stevens County tax sale on Saturday, March 14, 1987, to a private buyer." Lawrence closed his eyes. "Who is the buyer?" "Edsel Wadlow, 71 years old, retired wheat farmer, 3.5 miles south of Duncan. His father, Wilbur Wadlow, was a chainman on our 1948 survey crew." Lawrence Tobias did not speak for 9 full seconds. Then he said very quietly, "Vernon, what does this mean?" Vernon Pell exhaled. "Lawrence, without that 1-acre strip, Stratton-Reese has no legal surface access from the state highway down to the Comanche Field. Every road, every truck, every pipeline, gathering line, every electrical service line crosses that strip. It is in title terms the throat of the entire field. As of 7:42 this morning, every truck and every barrel and every cubic foot of gas that crosses that strip is a trespass. We are operating illegally on Mr. Wadlow's land." "Vernon," Lawrence said, "can we condemn it?" "No. Oklahoma condemnation law does not apply to private oil and gas operators against private surface owners. We cannot take it. We can only negotiate for it, or we can find an alternate route around it. The nearest alternate access is 6.5 miles east across the Cypress Creek bottoms, which would require regrading 3 culvert installations, 2 federal wetland permits, and approximately 18 months of construction. Estimated capital cost, $4.1 million, during which time the field produces nothing." Lawrence Tobias hung up the phone. He drove the rented sedan 3.5 miles south of Duncan, out onto the county section line, past the new 4-strand barbed wire fence with its hand-painted plywood sign, and up the long gravel turnaround to a wood-frame farmhouse with gingham curtains hanging in the kitchen windows. He killed the engine. He sat in the car for 1 full minute. Then he climbed out, walked up the 3 porch steps, and knocked on the screen door. Edsel Wadlow opened the door in a faded blue work shirt and dark blue jeans. He looked at Lawrence Tobias for a long, quiet moment, then stepped aside. "Come in, Mr. Tobias. The coffee's fresh." Lawrence Tobias sat at the kitchen table. The coffee can sat at his right elbow, its faded red rim worn nearly to the metal. The family Bible sat at the table's center with a folded yellowed surveyor's plat map tucked inside. 2 coffee cups steamed between them. Edsel poured. Edsel sat. "Mr. Wadlow," Lawrence began, "Edsel is fine." "Edsel," Lawrence cleared his throat. "Stratton-Reese Petroleum is prepared to offer $50,000 for the surface easement across your strip parcel. Cash today. We can have a notary out here by 3 o'clock. Edsel sipped his coffee. "Mr. Tobias." "Lawrence! Lawrence! I'm a quiet man. I'd like to be clear with you. That strip is 1 acre. It crosses every road, every pipe,
every wire that goes into your field. I've been a farmer in this county since 1936. I've watched Stratton-Reese pull oil out of the Comanche Field for 39 years. I'm aware of what the field produces. I'm aware of what your monthly gross is. And I'm aware that the only alternate route is 6.5 miles east through the Cypress Creek bottoms at a cost of approximately $4 million and 18 months. Lawrence Tobias set his coffee cup down very carefully on the table. Edsel, we can offer $200,000, cash, today. That is more than your land is worth. That is more than the Comanche Field has paid for any single surface easement in its history. Edsel folded his hands on the kitchen table. Lawrence, I'm not selling the easement. I'm leasing it. There was a pause. Lawrence Tobias's jaw moved slightly. What are you proposing? $480,000 for a 50-year surface easement, paid in cash by close of business tomorrow, plus an overriding royalty of 1/16 of every barrel of crude and every cubic foot of gas that crosses my acre, paid monthly, beginning April 1st, 1987, plus a full release of any past trespass claims I may have for the period from July 6th, 1948 to today. Edsel paused. I would like you to sign tomorrow morning at this kitchen table with a notary, and I would like the instruments recorded at the Stevens County Courthouse before noon. Lawrence Tobias did the math in his head. He had been a landman for 22 years and an executive for 6, and he could do this math in his sleep. The Comanche Field produced, at the current strip well average, somewhere between 48,000 and 62,000 barrels of crude per month. At $16.20 a barrel, the field grossed nearly $900,000 a month at the lower end of production. A 1/16 overriding royalty was approximately $56,000 a month, $670,000 a year. Across a 50-year easement at present production rates that came to nearly $34 million. And the field had been forecast in the Corporate Reserve Report to hold its production through 2014, plus $480,000 cash tomorrow morning, before any of this could even be discussed with the Tulsa board. Plus a release of 40 years of potential trespass damages, which, if Edsel Wadlow had a halfway competent lawyer in Oklahoma City or in Tulsa, could on their own have ranged comfortably into the 8 figures. The widow Holcomb's nephew was an oil and gas attorney in Tulsa with a reputation for taking cases on contingency. Lawrence had met him once at a county bar function. The nephew did not lose. Lawrence Tobias looked at the old farmer across the kitchen table. He thought, for one bitter half-second, about saying no, about walking out, about the $4 million alternate route, about the 18 months of shut-in production, about the corporate board in Tulsa, about his own bonus, which depended directly on the Comanche Field's quarterly numbers. He thought about the laugh he had laughed in the front row of the Stevens County District Courtroom on Saturday morning, March 14th, 2 days ago. He set down his coffee cup. He nodded once. Edsel, we have a deal. I will be here tomorrow morning at 8:30 with our notary and our title attorney. Bring 2 pens, Edsel said. Mine is light on ink. The signing took place at the kitchen table at 8:45 on the morning of Tuesday, March 17th, 1987. Vernon Pell was present in a gray 3-piece suit.
The notary was a woman from Comanche named Velma Plunkett. Lawrence Tobias signed the surface easement, the royalty grant, and the trespass release with a silver fountain pen. Edsel signed each instrument in his careful blue ink farmer's hand, the same hand his daddy had taught him on the porch in 1948. Velma Plunkett pressed her notary stamp into each signature page. Vernon Pell counted out $480,000 in 7 cashier's checks across the kitchen table. At 11:58 that morning, Vernon Pell filed the recorded easement at the Stevens County Courthouse, 2 minutes before noon, exactly as Edsel had requested. The news, of course, did not stay quiet. Mavis Coldwell at the county treasurer's office mentioned it to her sister-in-law that night over a casserole. The sister-in-law mentioned it to the choir director at the Duncan First Methodist Church. By Sunday morning, every farmer and every roughneck and every coffee shop in Stevens County knew that the old wheat farmer south of Duncan had bought a 1-acre strip at the tax sale for $3,200 on Saturday and signed a Stratton-Reese surface easement and royalty grant at his kitchen table on Tuesday. The widow Holcomb, who had laughed loudest in the 3rd row at the courthouse, came out to the farm on the following Thursday morning with a peach pie wrapped in a flour sack towel and stood on Edsel's porch and apologized for laughing. Edsel told her the pie was generous. He invited her in for coffee. They sat at the kitchen table where the surface easement had been signed 48 hours earlier. Neither of them spoke of the auction again. The oil field welder from Marlow, who had told his neighbor that Edsel had lost his mind, drove out 2 weeks later and tipped his cap from the cab of his truck at the new fence. He did not get out. He just tipped his cap. Edsel saw him from the porch and tipped his cap back. The first royalty check arrived in Edsel Wadlow's roadside mailbox on the afternoon of Monday, June 15th, 1987. He was working in the garden when he saw the rural route mail carrier's white truck stop at the box. He set down his hoe in the okra row. He walked the gravel turnaround in his work boots, in no hurry. The cottonwoods along the fence line were full out in their summer green. The wind moved gently across the wheat in the south quarter. He opened the mailbox. There was the propane bill. There was a postcard from his cousin in Wichita Falls. And there was a long, blue and white windowed envelope with a Stratton-Reese Petroleum Corporation, return address corner, stamped accounts payable, June 1987. He stood at the mailbox for 1 full minute, looking at the envelope. He did not open it there. He carried the mail back up to the house. He set the propane bill on the dish drainer. He set the postcard from his cousin on the icebox door under a magnet. And he carried the blue and white envelope into the kitchen, where the afternoon sun came through the gingham curtains at the south window and laid a warm yellow rectangle across the worn linoleum and the edge of the kitchen table. He sat down at the table. He opened the envelope with a paring knife. He pulled out the folded check. It was made out for $39,420. The amount was the 1/16th overriding royalty on the Comanche Field's May 1987 production. He carried the check to the kitchen table. He set it down beside the coffee can. He pulled the folded 1923 partition deed and his daddy's chainman's notes from the can. He laid them flat on the table beside the check. He poured 2 cups of coffee. He set one in front of his own chair. He set the other across from him, where his daddy used to sit in 1948, where his wife Marjorie used to sit in 1979. He set his hand flat on the coffee can. He looked at his daddy's penciled survey notes, 39 years old, still legible. "We did it, Daddy," he said quietly, "right on time." And that, friends, that is the story.